This webinar will cover the topics of ethics, policies, and procedures for speech-language pathologists in the school system. This webinar is presented by Debbie Lozo. Learner outcomes. By the end of this webinar, the learner will be able to identify resources that provide ethical guidelines, policies, and procedures for speech-language services in the school, and use these guidelines to evaluate potential actions and activities for SLPs in real-life scenarios. The webinar will now begin.
5 or more years, over 35 now, and I just kind of these are the ones that like hit me the most. But I also want to encourage Joni or Christine, if you have some ideas, to add them. First one is honesty. You need to be honest, but you also want to be tactful. Sometimes we're dealing with parents who are having some difficulties accepting their child has a disability. So you want to be, honest but careful. You never ever want to sign anyone else's name to a piece of paper. Even there are situations I've been in where a teacher has come into an IEP meeting and forgot to sign their name and left early. So they came in, did their part, and left and forgot to sign. Never sign anyone else's name. Know that there is an electronic paper trail. If you don't follow the procedures, or if you go into, for example, an electronic IEP and change something, it shows that it was you who changed it. So just know that you should follow those procedures, and they're usually outlined in your school district when you start. I have known people to lose jobs over some of these things. So it is very important that you follow the procedures. Don't do a shortcut. Remember what we said, the ends don't justify the means. We've got to take the high road. Okay, and then no matter what setting you work in, these things apply. So even though we're talking about school-based practices, they apply everywhere. Have good judgment, and I know that sounds kind of corny, and it also sounds like, can you teach good judgment? Not sure you can, but use it. Think about it. Think about, you're in a weird situation. Use good judgment to get through it. Have a good understanding of the rules and regulations that you are under. Again, while we're talking about school-based practices, and IDEA is our big law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, there are still other things, other practices that also have rules and regulations. No matter where you work, there's going to be some. Make sure you understand the ones that you work in. Then learn from your mistakes, and also as you see another person make a mistake, learn from theirs. And I just can't tell you how important that is. You do it once, people forgive you. You do it several times, the same mistake, and people begin to see a pattern and think that you're not as good maybe as someone else. So again, learn from your mistakes. Inspire trust. Whenever I start out in a new job, I always start out with the best intentions. These are great people to work with, and I believe this is going to be a great year. Believe that one will do the right thing first. That, okay, maybe someone might make a mistake, but they're going to try to do the right thing. Care about others and do what you say you will do. The worst thing about being new to a job is to promise some things and not fulfill them. People begin to lose trust in you. Okay, so those are kind of mine. I don't know if Christine or Joni, if you have any others you'd want to add? Okay, maybe not. Okay, we'll keep going.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to get myself off of unmute. I think that covers it. That's great.
Give you more time. Okay. Okay, so those are just mine, and you'll develop personal ones as you practice more in the field. So, it depends on where you're coming from. Okay, so moral principles. I attended a session on ethics at the ASHA Schools Conference this summer, and it was run by the ASHA lawyer and someone from the Board of Ethics in ASHA, and I liked that. They gave us some background. They talked about Kitchener identifying 5 moral principles that are the underpinnings of many ethical guidelines. And the 5 principles are autonomy, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, and fidelity. Okay, big words there, some of them anyways. But if we think about it, autonomy kind of means, okay, so you have been through a rigorous graduate school, and you've passed the praxis, and you have your PCE or license, and if you haven't yet done that, you might be going through your clinical fellowship. And once you get that and you get your CCCs, you should have some autonomy. You should be able to diagnose, treat, develop professional protocols on how to treat someone. You should have that freedom. So that makes sense that is in the ASHA guidelines, that you should have that autonomy, especially after going through such a rigorous program and receiving your CCCs. And then they talk about justice, and there's a fairness principle in dealing with especially the folks that we treat or do therapy with, but others as well. And then the beneficence, doing good for others, that usually is a big push within the ethical guidelines. And non-maleficence, preventing or avoiding harm, and that's a big one too, not to harm our students or our clients. And then fidelity, having some loyalty either to the profession or to the work setting, the place we work, and avoiding conflicts of interest. So all of those are important. And then the folks from ASHA talked about how they have sort of changed, interpreted that, taken that, and looked at autonomy as having the right of self-determination. So kind of looking again at our professional abilities there. And then beneficence, doing good for others, non-maleficence, preventing or doing no harm, justice, treating individuals fairly. And then they added a couple other things. Well, actually one other thing. They talked about professional competence and knowing boundaries. And we have a really wide field. We are birth through death, basically. And we are medical, we are private sector, we are public school sector, private school sector, and we can go on and on and on. So they say knowing the boundaries of your competency are really important. And if you want to look up like a summary of state information, you can
Hey, Debbie.
have a license. That's where it's from. Yes, do we have a question?
No, I'm sorry. I lost your audio. Did anybody else? I don't know. Okay, you're good now, though, so keep going.
I am? Okay. Okay, thanks. So the summary of the state information, go to that website and you can see what your state says. Mostly it's related to licensure. Okay, so we know that professional organizations and regulatory agencies have sanctions. And some of the examples are a private reprimand. And that would be where someone from your organization talks to you privately and says, don't do that again. If you do, this was unethical, etc., etc. And then sometimes you'll get that, sometimes you won't. Sometimes it will go right to a public type of reprimand or a public issue, and it can be published in public newsletters, newspapers, etc. And usually the ones that are published for public are discontinued membership and or certification, which an organization like ASHA can do. Suspension, might be suspension of your CCCs, but it also could be suspension of a license, or total revocation, where they take away your certification, your licensure, whatever. So all of those are very important, and you don't want them to happen to you, especially. Okay, so do we have guidance? Yes. When we work in the schools, we have a number of organizations that provide guidance for us. And so it's important to know about those. And we'll start with the ASHA Code of Ethics, and we're going to do some more things with that. But on advance, when at the end of this session, you'll get some information on how to log in there and report your hours and take a quick test and get CEU credits for this webinar. There is a resource tab that tells you, that you can click on, and it will have the ASHA Code of Ethics. Now, it will have a state license code of conduct, but for this, because I live in Georgia, I put Georgia's there. But again, you can go back to that, the PowerPoint. Oh, I'll have the PowerPoint on there too, with the links, and you can go back to that link and look for your state if you're not in Georgia. Then you should look, and it would be in different places for different states, for your state code of ethics for educators. And that's your Department of Education. Sometimes we call it DOE. And I listed Georgia's, but you might want to go, if you're not in Georgia, go ahead. I posted Georgia. But if you are not in Georgia, go ahead and search your Department of Education for the Code of Ethics for Educators. And again, it might be called something slightly different, but every state has one. And so it's important that you know that you are under the Code of Ethics for teachers, and even because you are an educator. And I know we don't always think of ourselves that way. We're therapists, but we are also educators. And so that's another important code to be familiar with. So you want your ASHA code, you want your licensure code. We pretty much all have our license. We want to know what is ethical for educators. And then this other one is not quite as important, but the Council for Exceptional Children, which is special education, and that's the umbrella that we're under as speech-language pathologists. And they actually have a code too, and most of the ethics that we deal with, or that one would deal with, are in standard number 6. So I think I posted that too. So just to give you an idea that when you work in the schools, you're going to be under different codes of ethics. Multiple is what I should say. And actually, if you work in a hospital or medical setting or private practice, you are going to probably have other codes of ethics there too. So it's not unusual. I really like ASHA's Code of Ethics, and I think that might be our major one, but you should be knowledgeable of the others as well. Okay, so in this presentation by the ASHA folks this summer, they said applying the Code of Ethics can be difficult. It's most of them are broadly written with general rules. The ethical concerns can be complex. You may find yourself in a situation that, wow, I never thought this could happen. There's a lot to this situation. It may not completely address, the examples that they have in the Code of Ethics may not completely address the scenario that you're under. You might find yourself in conflict with some institutional, organizational, or employer policies and practices. And I'd like to say that never happens in the schools, but occasionally I have heard of them. And sometimes it's a situation that maybe a principal has interpreted something one way and it's against our Code of Ethics. And I always kind of think, there's always a higher power and there's always someone that I can talk to get some advice. So remember that. There might be conflicts in requiring to practice within a framework of these different codes. It might be confusing since you know that you have these different ones. Some are state, some are local, So it's important to know the codes that apply to you. Okay, we're going to spend a little bit of time with the ASHA codes of ethics because that is kind of universal for us. We all know that applies to us. Also, I wanted to mention that I have been hearing that Many state licensure boards are looking at requiring an update within so many years of your training on codes of ethics. I heard that for Georgia, but some other states too. And then I've also heard that it may be built into the ASHA CCC requirements for continuing ed, that you might have a refresher course on ethics. So I think all of those things make this webinar kind of important. Just this information could be useful for you, and you may be able to use it as showing that you had an update on the codes on ethics. Oh, one other thing, the ASHA Code of Ethics is being revised. So while we are under this one for now, because that's what's there, there might be some additional information. And I'm sure if you're, ASHA member, or will be once you get your CCCs, that you'll get information on that. Okay, so there are 4 principles of ethics that form the basis for the code. And principle 1 deals with responsibilities to persons served professionally. So that is where we kind of get into the, no harm type of idea, the fact that we honor our responsibility, and then we hold paramount the welfare of persons that we serve professionally. We participate in research and scholarly activities, and so anyway, so forth. Principle 2 involves responsibilities for one's professional competence, and individuals should honor their responsibility to achieve and maintain the highest level of professional competence and performance. Principle 3. Principle 3 deals with individuals shall honor their responsibility to the public by promoting public understanding of the profession, supporting the development of services designed to fulfill the needs of the public, providing accurate information in all communications involving any aspect of the professions, including dissemination of research findings, scholarly activities, and promotion, marketing, and advertising of products and services. And then principle 4 deals with individuals shall honor their responsibilities to the professions and their relationship with colleagues, students, and members of other professions and disciplines. So that just kind of gives you an overview of the ASHA Code of Ethics. And ASHA provides a number of resources. They actually have a board of ethics headed up by a lawyer, but also by a number of professionals in different settings, school-based settings, university settings, private practice. Audiology is included, of course, too. So they have a board of ethics. You can find them on their on the website, and they have a complaint process, and that it's explained there on the website. And also the ASHA Leader, almost every issue provides something on ethics. And then there are presentations and webinars as well. So for the ASHA part of ethics, there are a lot of resources. They mentioned in the summer presentation that there are some common themes of inquiries. And inquiry means someone who's contacting the Board of Ethics with a possible ethical issue. And so they talk through those, or we can talk through those. But they look at documentation lapses where, maybe it's progress notes, or it might be other paperwork that the lapses, that they're not completed, or they're incomplete, and sometimes that can become an ethical issue. Sometimes employers demand SLPs to do something that they feel is not ethical. There are issues involving the use and supervision of support personnel, and there are some state-by-state guidelines on that, but sometimes it's very loose. So that's an important issue too. How you use, for example, in the schools, an SLP assistant or paraprofessional. Then there are impaired practitioner / professional issues. And I'm really sorry to say this, but I did work with an SLP who had that issue, and she's a wonderful person, but she developed MS, and it really impacted her cognitive ability. And so her therapy, I mean, over a number of years, declined. And she started using these very rote formats, and she would use them for everything, whether it was fluency or voice or a tic or language. And the students actually knew more, sometimes seemed to know more than she did. And she was under treatment, and so many of us felt bad for her that we went through a series of professional development plans. And most of the time, a school district would not do that for so many different plans, but we would have a new lead SLP or a new SLP supervisor, and we would try again. So I was probably the first one who tried with the professional development plan, but it went through several other people and several principals. And finally, we had a principal who finally, challenged her and stopped feeling sorry for her and just sat down with her and said, you're harming your students because you're not getting to what they need. They're not getting the therapy they need. And you can retire. Maybe it's time. And then she did. So interesting. But sometimes you do find someone who's impaired in their position. Reimbursement for services. We sometimes see some issues with a session being billed but not held. So that's an issue. Client abandonment. You're serving the client, all of a sudden you're unreachable and the client's wondering what's happened and you're not there. And so sometimes that happens. Someone may have a life change, but you of course have to let your client know. And then professional versus business ethics. There are differences there. The business ethic is to make the money, but the professional ethic is to serve the client, and you have to look at both of those. And then sometimes with clinical fellowships, the supervision is not what it's supposed to be. The hours are not kept up, or the procedures are not kept up. And I actually knew someone, sorry to say, in a school district I worked in the past who let her ASHA Cs lapse, and she was in the process of supervising someone with a CF. And that was terrible because that CF didn't count. So, all of those things are important. And then sometimes there are disclosures for past bad behavior, and how do you deal with that? So, wow, lots of things that get reported to ASHA as an ethical dilemma. And there is a website there. I actually tried it, and it did not work for me, but I left it there. This slide, again, is from that summer ASHA presentation. But I thought it was very interesting that in that orangish, brownish box, the overall recurring theme, according to ASHA, is professional competence and knowing and understanding boundaries. So I thought that was very important. And for me, professional competence and understanding boundaries might be recency of training. I've been in the field, as I mentioned, a really long time. And there was a point, I did do some home health care and some other types of therapy outside of the schools, but there was a time when I decided that working in the schools is what I wanted to do, and that is, I was going to commit myself to that for the rest of my career. So I stopped paying attention to trainings that dealt with medical issues or dysphagia or things like that. So I know now that I would never present myself, even if I have my CCCs, as being really knowledgeable about some of these more medically related therapies, because I haven't kept up with it. If I wanted to, then I'd have to go back and get training. So that's another kind of piece. This is the old person's view, but you also may have a view looking at the training you received, in your graduate school, or whether you took one track or another, that it's important that you keep with what you're really competent on, because our field is so broad. And it's great because we have options to work in many different settings, but we also have to know whether or not we're competent and we have that background knowledge to be successful, because the field keeps changing constantly. So you have to keep up with your area. Okay, hope that makes sense. Okay, so just a little joke here as we talk about all these serious things. How important are ethics in today's society? So we have a classroom of adults, and some guy's writing, and everybody's like copying him, like plagiarizing him. So for his ideas. So anyways, they are important. Just joking. They are really important because ASHA publishes ethical violations. And this was from, I think it's August 2014, so very recent. The Board of Ethics decisions. I might have the month off, so don't quote me there, but I think, you can see they're effective May 16th, 2014. Okay, just take a look at this. You'll see, I'm not going to read the person's name, but someone from Georgia was charged with falsification of patient records to substantiate fraudulent billing, and by the guilty plea related to fraudulent billing, he violated these principles. So here, we talked about principle 1, 2, 3, and 4 from ASHA's Code of Ethics, and so they actually list the principles that he violated. Principle 1, Rule M, individuals shall adequately maintain and appropriately secure records of services rendered, and goes on and on. Allow access to these records only when authorized. There was a Principle 1, Rule O, individuals shall not charge for services not rendered, and they shall not misrepresent services rendered, etc., etc. Principle 3, Rule D, individuals shall not misrepresent research, diagnostic information, services rendered, etc., etc. Principle 3, Rule E, individuals shall not defraud or engage in any scheme to defraud in connection with obtaining payment, reimbursement, grants for services, etc. Principle 4, Rule C, individuals shall not engage in dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. So I highlighted what happened to him. The sanction is withholding of ASHA membership and certification for life, effective May 13, 2014. So, of course, hopefully we are never going to do anything as severe as that, but imagine getting your name published in the ASHA leader about this. So there are some severe consequences if you do something that's not ethical. And then you can keep going. Matthew Murray, of Rochester, I wasn't going to say the name, submitted billing records and billing notes indicating services had been rendered without the provision of such services. And so it lists the things that he violated, and his sanction is revocation of ASHA membership and certification for 24 months. Okay, so that's a little bit different. The other one was for life. This one is for 2 years. But if that's your main livelihood, that's a big chunk of time. Okay, and then they found one other one, and this was for someone in Tennessee submitting billing grids, therapy notes, and invoices indicating services that have been rendered without the provision. And again, you see theirs, and her sanction was revocation of ASHA membership and certification for 60 months. So it kind of depends on what the board decides and the severity of it, but I don't think any of us ever want to be in the ASHA leader for anything like that. And if that's your career, wow, that's devastating. And then I teach a class called Ethics, Policies, and Procedures, to undergrad communication disorders students who are seniors in undergrad, in the undergrad program. And they told me that they said some things. I was very surprised. They said anyone who does that was planning to do it, that they had, it was not just a mistake. This was planned out and done. And I thought that was kind of a good way to point out that these are not just little mistakes. These are big things. Okay, so ASHA provides some models in looking at what would you do if you found yourself in an ethical dilemma. And so I put the references there, and there's actually a book you can buy. I'm not sure that you can get these references for free, which kind of bothers me, but they have a model, and it was developed by Morris and Chabon, and they look at, you start out by saying, something here doesn't sound right. Am I facing an ethical dilemma here? Okay, so I need to kind of sit myself down and think this through. What are the relevant facts, values, and beliefs? You know, what's happening here? And then who are the key people involved? And then kind of state the dilemma to yourself, or you might write it down, or you might have a buddy or a colleague who's working with you on it. State the dilemma clearly and then analyze it. So this is the beginning kind of looking at ethical dilemmas. Okay, so we have some that, again, I learned from the summer session and adapted from Bupp and Rogers, who presented that session. And let's talk through them, because they're very interesting and they really get us to think about ethics and what we should do. Okay, so we have an SLP who has the flu and will likely miss several days of work. She realizes it, obviously, and she hurriedly completes the Medicaid billing for the students seen that week. She submits the required paperwork to the central office and leaves work early. When she returns to school, she discovers billing had been submitted in error for a student who did not receive therapy that day because the SLP left school early. She decides to rectify the error by not billing for a future session with the student. Okay, think about this. What is the ethical issue? Which ASHA Code of Ethics principles does it violate? Could the situation have been presented or resolved? Okay, so you want to think about all those three issues as we go through this. Okay, so we are going to take a poll. We want to know, what is the ethical issue? Is it a conflict of interest or a possible misrepresentation of school services? Is it misrepresenting competency? Is it revealing confidential information without authorization, which violates FERPA? Or is it reporting services that were not provided, or fraud? Okay, Lydia, this is your, yes, thanks. Close poll to enable fraud, even though the SLP didn't mean to. That's the way Medicaid would take it, that the student didn't receive the service on that day, so that's fraud. Okay, so we'll talk about what that SLP can do that maybe, you know, could prevent this issue. Okay, so which ASHA Code of Ethics principle does it violate? Principle 3, which has to do with honoring responsibility to the public by, I'm going to skip over some of this, providing accurate information in all communications involving any aspect of the profession, including dissemination of research and advertising, marketing products. I know that sort of doesn't sound like what this is, but the actual the letter under that E says individuals shall not defraud or engage in any scheme to defraud in connection with obtaining payment, reimbursement, or grants for services rendered, research conducted, or products dispensed. So even though in this situation the school-based SLP will not have a financial gain, it's a financial gain for the school district to bill for a session that wasn't actually provided. Okay, so now there is another principle, it's principle 4, that says individuals shall honor their responsibilities to their professions and their relationship with colleagues, students, and members of their profession and disciplines. And number C says individuals shall not engage in dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. Now, it definitely would be a misrepresentation to count one session that they didn't receive and count that for reimbursement and then not count one they did receive. Okay, so could the situation have been prevented or resolved? Yes. The SLP could check on procedures when a mistake is made. Most of these Medicaid reimbursement programs that you use are, well, they're almost all electronic. So it is possible to click on the wrong thing. And most software programs have a way to correct mistakes, and often they work through an agency. A school district will contact with an agency that has a program for reporting Medicaid to get reimbursed. And so you would contact the representative, and most school districts have a contact person. And you would just say, look, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry, but I clicked the student received services on this day, and he didn't. And then they would have a way to correct it. Also, you should know that it takes a few weeks before they actually submit data for reimbursement to, it's usually the Medicaid agency of the state. So even if you were out a week because you were really, really sick, you still should have some time to correct it. And there's still a way to go back and resubmit a correction. The other thing, and I love this, that my students said to me was that, you know what, maybe you should use common sense. You got the flu, you're really sick. Don't go in and submit this tedious stuff that, you know, you're feeling really sick and you might make a mistake. You're more likely to make a mistake when you're really sick. It would be better if you just emailed the appropriate person in your district. You know, it might be the lead SLP, or it might be the software Medicaid representative, that company that deal with, and say, I am really sick, I've got to go home early, I'm not going to be able to submit data today, but I will do it as soon as I get back. You know, and again, most places would accept that. They don't want you to be submitting things when you're sick. So think about this. If you have any questions or ideas you'd like to add, please feel free. As soon as I get it to cooperate here. There we go. Okay, this is scenario, oops, nope, let's go back. Okay. Okay, there we are. Okay, we have a new scenario. This is Janie Smith. She's a new, enthusiastic SLP who began to work in the local school system. She enjoys communicating with students and their families in her school and outside of work. She has friended several of the older students with hearing impairments on Facebook, as well as their families. Contained within Janie's Facebook postings is information about how much progress her cochlear implant students made that month. Okay, so what is the ethical issue? Which ASHA Code of Ethics principles does it violate? And could the situation have been presented or resolved? So our main question to you is the ethical issue, and the poll is open. Okay. And there are the without authorization. And this violates FERPA. Now, if you've worked in the medical field before, you might remember HIPAA, but in the educational realm, we have something called FERPA, which is really similar. It's called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And it has the same protection, well, I mean similar, I should say, similar protections as HIPAA. And so you should not reveal confidential information, especially out on the internet, without authorization. So which ASHA code does it violate? It's Principle 1, N, which Principle 1 is about responsibility to hold paramount the welfare of persons they serve professionally, who are participants in research, etc., etc. And then N is individuals shall not reveal without authorization any professional or personal information about identified persons serving professionally or identified participants involved in research, scholarly activities, unless doing so is necessary to protect the welfare of the person or the community or otherwise required by law. Okay, very wordy, but basically, you know, you've got to protect that confidentiality. You should never post it in a situation like that. So what could the SLP have done? First of all, review that those confidentiality rules. She's new and she's excited and, you know, she's seeing some progress, but that is not the place to put it. And be more careful about the professional-client relationship boundaries. And it's really interesting, my students in class talked about that a little bit. They said, you have to remember you are a professional, and even though you might meet someone who's a family member of the student that you really connect with and could really be friends with, you have to be careful about that relationship. I have one example, and it's not exactly to this point, but it's definitely a learning lesson where a great special ed teacher at the preschool level worked closely with a family who was kind of in that litigation mode. They they questioned everything, and they were kind of difficult, and we'd had some maybe mediation type meetings with them where we had to have an outsider help us resolve issues, and whoever the supervisor was assigned her to this preschool child because they knew she was really good and that she would work closely with the family. Well, she made the mistake of giving them her home number. And I'm not saying that you never give parents your home number, but you need to be careful about it. And this parent called her one time and kind of went through all these things she's unhappy with, and, you know, like took an hour or something out of her time at night. And she thought she hung up. This was in the days of the, well, portable phones were around then. And she went and talked to her husband and said, oh my gosh, she took an hour and she went through this and this and this. She had not really hung up the phone, and the parent heard all of it. So again, and it created a terrible situation. So again, it's kind of like, whoa, be careful, keep those boundaries in mind when you deal with parents, especially ones that tend to be more demanding and tend to like litigation. Not that you always know that. Okay, we will move on. Scenario 3. Megan Baker's speech and language skills were screened by the SLP at Bayou Elementary School. The results of the screening indicated the need for speech-language interventions, primarily through the RTI process, a service provided by the school system. However, the SLP convinces Mr. and Mrs. Baker that Megan's needs would be better served if they allowed her to complete a more thorough evaluation at the private practice clinic, where she works part-time after school. Okay, so think through that, 3 same questions. And here are, you know, what is the ethical issue? And Lydia, are we doing the poll?
Yes, it's up. I've 100% chose conflict of interest, possible misrepresentation of services.
Good job. All right. All right. So definitely that was it. And you have to understand the RTI process, the fact that you provide strategies, see if they work, work through a process. And it does take some time, but in the end, the school district can provide the services a student needs. So by saying that we weren't being comprehensive at the beginning, well, we would be once we worked through our procedures. And so which code of ethics does it violate? Principle 3, which we already talked about. That was the one that deals with responsibility to the public, promoting understanding of the profession, etc. And Principle B was individuals shall not participate in professional activities that constitute a conflict of interest. And then Principle 4, that has to do with honoring responsibilities to the profession and relationships with colleagues, students, and members of other professions and disciplines. C is individuals shall not engage in dishonesty, fraud, or deceit, or misrepresentation. And we feel like that could have been a misrepresentation. So could we have prevented this? Yes. SLP should review the Code of Ethics and school district procedures and understand that this could be a reason to actually lose her primary job. You know, if you do things like that more than once, there'll be a consequence. Now, I do want to mention, I did experience this one time. We had an SLP who was leaving us, moving, well, no, she wasn't moving. She was going into private practice, partnering, a partnership she was developing in private practice. And so she was leaving our school district and had resigned. And on her last day of work, as students were leaving the school, and they were targeted students like in special ed or in speech, she handed out cards, business cards, that told about her new practice. And let's see, the kids leave for the buses and the car riders line somewhere around 2:20, and teachers are expected to work till 3 o'clock. So technically, she was still on the job. And when I heard about that, I was really concerned. But then I found out the principal had pulled her aside and given her a private reprimand, saying that that was unprofessional, it was a conflict of interest, and that she had no right, you know, to do that while she was still on the job in our district. So anyways, it happens. So we have one last scenario. We can go quickly through this one. The child of a well-known state legislator receives speech and language services at the neighborhood middle school. While at the State Speech, Language, and Hearing Association conventions, social and cocktail party, the SLP providing the therapy to the student shares that she works with a well-known family. Although the family name was never mentioned, the conversation, which was overheard by another SLP, included personally identified information. Okay, so same questions as the other. Major thing is, what is the ethical issue? Okay, we'll give you a minute to do the poll. It's our last poll. Okay, and so there we go. And I'm not going to go over those principles and all, since we have already kind of talked through this one. But just a different situation. One other thing I forgot to mention when we did the scenario, I think it was number 2 with the Facebook. Some of my class students said that they thought that maybe the Code of Ethics should start dealing with social media. Just a thought that there is more and more social media going on, and possibly provide some guidelines there. I thought that was a great insight. Okay, so there are, ASHA, you know, acknowledges there are a lot of ethical dilemmas, and they're a part of our practice. They actually said there are about 3,500 informal ethics inquiries to ASHA every year. That's quite a bit. And I left some references for you if you want to look at those. And then I think we want to just mention a few housekeeping or follow-up information, and hope that we see you in our next jump. Christina or Joni, do you have anything you want to